I'm working on it. I still see 445.
I see it.
There we go.
Yep.
No, I was just saying it wasn't up yet, basically. And yeah,
It
now
is
I'm
available.
hearing what I just said a moment ago.
Okay.
So I think we are good there.
Yeah, I think we are up and running. So give it a couple seconds, then Mackie, whenever you're ready.
Welcome to PolyCast episode 446. I'm Makalua. With me, as usual, Mega Bears fan.
Without a toddler for now.
And the me and team.
Welcome. We are camping near their trade routes.
For no malicious reason
delicious
whatsoever.
coin.
Just observing.
It's a good location.
Commerce is a spectator sport.
I don't know if I'd go that far. I mean, there's work involved with commerce and interacting with it.
Yes, commerce is very interactive.
Interactive into my pocket?
That's the best kind of interactive.
It's interacting into somebody's. It's just a question of whose.
Well, one thing that is still interactive is Civilization 7, which continues to get updates on pretty much a monthly basis. So we had the patch 1.2.0 last month that added like a bunch of new resources and some other stuff. And then I think like last week we got 1.2.1, which isn't as big a thing, hence the, .2.1 part. This isn't .3 yet. But we did get some things that a lot of people have been requesting, which is... these are the... Oh, actually, hold on. I'm looking at the list of things they're still working on. Where's the list of things that got added? Here we go. Okay, so... new features are a Pangea Plus map type, which is nice. I definitely love the all these little maps that have little islands scattered around. That was one of my favorite new map types that was introduced, I think, late in Civ 5's life cycle. So it's kind of nice that these are just what the basic maps are for Civ 7. Definitely makes building naval units a lot more worthwhile. For obvious reasons in the case of Civ 7 for the way the exploration age works. But now you have a Pangea Plus map, which goes along with the fact that all players can now, hypothetically, start out on the same continent, unless there is not enough room for all of them, in which case they'll start going to another continent. But that means that we can now support a proper Pangea map where there is only one continent for all of the players to start on. And the way that the exploration age will now work is that the continent that you start on is considered your homelands for the purposes of resources and treasure resources, and the surrounding islands in the Pangea Plus or the other continent on other map types would be distant lands. So if you start on a different continent than another player, then your homelands are now that other player's distant lands, and vice versa. Honestly, I think that's the way the game should have worked when it launched, but I mean, better late than never, and this stuff is moving pretty quickly. I mean, the game's only been out for 4 months now, and we're getting this sort of stuff, so they're powering this stuff out pretty quickly. They also increased the number of players who can participate in multiplayer. I forget what the old numbers are, but it looks like at standard it goes up to 8. What did it used to be? I thought it was 8. Oh, for multiplayer. Okay. For single player, I think it was always 8. And then there's a bunch of new balancing updates and stuff for different leaders and civilizations. I don't know that we need to go through all of these, but if anyone sees any particular highlights or something that's particularly interesting, we can talk about that.
No, I do appreciate the dev notes explaining some of the reasoning.
Yeah, I think I remember in the past, a lot of times for updates like this, they would just say balance updates, or tweaked leader abilities or something like that, and wouldn't be super specific. But now not only do they tell us what exactly they changed, they also give us the logic behind the change, which is kind of neat to get the little glance into the mindset of the developers. For example, the very first one they list here is Friedrich, which I will say is always I think he is my most hated AI leader in Civ 7 so far, because he and I never get along. I think it has to do with his agenda. Like, he wants you to have wonders in your cities, but like if you meet him very early in the game before you can build a wonder, he just hates you. And that always seems to be the case with me. He's always like the first or second leader that I meet before I have any wonders, and we just never get off on the right foot. But anyway, he now gains a free infantry unit whenever you complete a tech mastery or construct a science building. So I think the old one was just when you finished a science building, but now you also get it for a tech mastery. So, they say specifically that they want to reward this leader for pursuing specific gameplay goals, in this case science, and make the reward feel worth it. So now your science focus gives you an army to defend all your science.
Because depending on the size of the map, you might not have had many cities to build science buildings in, so it wouldn't work out quite the way they intended.
Yeah, and while unit count ideally should scale with map size, it does not scale linearly that way.
I think
any Civ game, to my knowledge.
I think perhaps the more important consideration is now the difference between cities and towns, right? Because because not all of your cities are actual cities anymore, and towns can't build science buildings, right? Which means if you only have one or two cities and all the rest of your settlements, you could have 10 other settlements, but if they're all towns, you're not building science buildings in those towns, and then not being able to use the bonus from building science buildings because there's only a couple of science buildings, that you can build in any given age. So if all your cities are towns, then you just wouldn't be able to use this ability very often. So
yeah, I guess that's a trade-off with how many cities versus towns you're running.
Right, and then Frederick Baroque has the same thing, except he also gets an extra culture for displayed great works. So, again, they give the justification for that to, try to keep the two of them in balance. Hatshepsut has additional culture for each resource instead of just getting one for every imported culture. So, they say that they saw that people were struggling to use her ability outside of the Antiquity Age because, diplomatic relations would fall apart and there'd be a lot more warfare in a lot of games. So that's less opportunity to import a resource. So now they're just giving her the culture for every resource, for every unique resource she has, regardless of where they come from. Which I think replaces the old ability of it only coming from imported resources. So you don't get to double dip in the case of an imported resource.
Yeah, because everything I've seen from people playing, the other leaders get angry so quickly sometimes. So it's like you'll have a couple of narrow windows where you can do your trade stuff, but then it just kind of shuts down because especially if you're doing well in the game, they hate, which fair enough, but still,
Yeah.
any of the leaders that have a diplomacy focus, that's gonna mess up their abilities.
And it probably also depends greatly on whether you're starting a game in one of the more advanced ages or if you're continuing on to an advanced age from Antiquity. Because if you're continuing from Antiquity, then you also get diplomatic buffs and debuffs for the different other leaders based on what your relationship was in the previous age. So if your relationship deteriorated late, because of your conflicting goals and priorities in the Antiquity, then that carries over into the exploration, and then you end up again with those situations where the other leaders just don't like you because something happened in the previous age that soured your relationship. And it could just be something as simple as that other AI was allied with a third AI that went to war with you, and so they got dragged into that, right? And that could completely tank your relationship in some cases, and then carry over to the next age.
We just need new peace deal options, like forcing what's left of a civilization to still trade with you after you take their stuff.
So, like vassalage from Civ 4.
Yeah, or transfer trade power from EU4. Yeah, anything like that.
Let's see. Himiko gets a bunch of new happiness bonuses. Jose Rizal gets more stuff when he completes narrative events. 20 culture, 20 gold, and 20 influence. Influence is big. That's crazy powerful. Damn. Especially early in the game when you get a crap ton of those narrative events. Pachacudi, cities now gain bonus production of this based on the city's food, and Xerxes added plus 10 trade range, as if Xerxes was not already powerful enough when it comes to trade and economics.
But they do point out that's because of trying to place things to take advantage of that was a problem for a lot of people. So
yeah, and especially in antiquity, like the trade route range is pretty short. Like I want to say for land routes, it's only 10 tiles, which is tiny. For water routes, I think it's double, so I think it's 20, or maybe it goes to 30. I forget. But water routes are, and we'll talk about this a little bit later perhaps, but water routes are really difficult to get going early in the game because they have a lot of very specific requirements that have to be met. And if you don't meet them, then you can't do them. And that definitely hurts early game water trade, at the point where not a lot of people have a lot of water cities.
I feel like the game is maybe making this a little harder than it was historically.
Yeah, well, not to get too far ahead of ourselves, but the big reason is that in order to trade with another settlement, that settlement needs to have an improved resource. Like, trade agreements don't just exchange gold anymore, right? It's basically they send you a resource and you give them gold, although that gold doesn't come from your treasury. It's just magic, bonus gold that gets, poofed out of the ether. But if the city hasn't improved resources yet, then you can't trade with them, even if they're on the coast and meet all the other requirements. It's like, not even just like in anticipation of them eventually claiming a resource. Like you have to wait until they have the resource, and then you can send a trade route there. Let's see, lots of Civ updates. Bulgaria, Great Britain, Khmer, Maja Hapit.
Bulgaria is apparently a big one because the pillaging was really strong.
Yeah.
Yeah, change it to one move instead of no move. Yes, that's probably a good idea.
Yeah, so
they still had to move first to pillage the tile, but this basically halved the rate at which they can pillage.
Right, so I'm guessing previously you could like pillage, move, pillage, or could you move, pillage, move, pillage?
I think as long as you had enough movement to move to where you wanted to pillage, you could just keep going.
Well, if it was no movement, I guess all you had to do was be standing on the tile. But also because of the way that like buildings can stack, did that mean that you could pillage the same tile multiple times, even though you didn't have movement? I haven't played as them yet, so I don't know how that worked.
Yeah, I have not either, but the implications of that is that you could, and the dev note below it suggests that that's probably true.
Yeah, so
players were winning extremely fast using this.
Yeah, that would be pretty rough, being on the defending side of that. So yeah, so that's one Civ that got a substantial debuff, very rightfully so. I'm not seeing a whole lot of other
defending side though. You're kind of screwed. Like if you're getting your stuff pillaged in any significant volume, something's gone sufficiently wrong that you're probably not capable of defending yourself anymore. What that does do though is like if there's multiple people still alive in modern, this pillaging nation is way more threatening because like they get so much stronger so much more quickly off their first target.
Yeah, you really do want to, and this has been the case, since Civ 6 with the, district mechanic, is that you really do need to put a greater focus on defending your borders and not letting the enemy, army into your territory at all. Because once they're in, they can, start pillaging. It's not like older versions of Civ where you just put your whole army in your cities, right? And then just defend it at your cities. Like you need to spread things out a little bit more, and it's particularly important in Civ 7 because we don't have those encampment districts anymore that just get the free bombardment. So you can't just put a bunch of encampments, and even the city centers don't have free bombardment anymore in Civ 7. So you have
Yeah,
to
that
have
was huge in 6 that they could do that.
yeah, I mean, in Civ 6, there were complaints that, invading other players' territory was too hard because they got so many free bombardments because cities would be so close together, and then they would have encampments, in the space between the cities. So it was like every second or third tile was a district that was bombarding your units on the way in,
I
and
would actually
potentially
frame it the other way, that defending was too easy. I mean, it's saying the same thing, but realistically, like the amount of investment you needed to stay alive against an aggressor was pretty low.
and
And
the,
that affected your trade-offs when you're deciding what to build.
and I think more importantly was that the investment required to do that was very low. Like you could get away
Yeah.
with ancient walls for a very long time, and there were a lot of ways to get very heavy discounts on more advanced walls. Like there were religious ways to like basically buy it with faith. I think there were ways to buy it with gold. There were policies that you could slot in that gave like 100%, or not 100%, but that halved the cost of like medieval or Renaissance walls. So, and that was all you had to build. You just had to build that one piece of infrastructure, right? You did not even have to have units in those cities. Like you could defend your empire in Civ 6 without having any units in some
On
cases.
the higher difficulties, you wanted a few units, because they would break your walls if you only had walls. But
Right.
it wasn't that hard. Like the number of units you needed versus what could be attacking you, and you could defend successfully as long as you had walls and like some degree of zone of control and unit healing. It was pretty disgusting, and you basically became unassailable once you got to artillery against the AI because you would just absolutely wreck things as on the approach and still have like a zone of control unit blocking them actually taking the city, and then
Yeah.
you'd counter kill their artillery. Like it got disgusting really quickly. But even earlier in the game, that same concept applied. Like if you have a couple range units shooting and like a unit or two blocking that you can rotate out, you can almost perma kill everything. It's it's pretty stupid.
Yeah, and one of the things that I like most about Civ 7 is that Civ 7 swung hard in the opposite direction, and I think in mostly good ways. Like Civ 7 puts a lot more focus on monitoring enemy movement, before the war happens, and like I said, on making sure that you have a military that can defend at your borders and not necessarily at the cities. And like, for example, like the scouts now have that lookout ability where they create, a little watchtower, right? So, the game encourages you to put that near enemy territory, or, in the space between your territory and their territory, so that you can monitor their movements. And then, if they declare war on you, then, hopefully you have enough time to, mobilize that scout and get it the heck out of there before it gets killed, because they are very squishy against military units, of course. But like, and then there's diplomatic options that let you monitor the movement, not of their specific units, but of their commanders, which are usually where all the units are. So yeah, it's a lot more about the preparation for the war and making sure that you know where the enemy is coming from and that you can meet them there is much more encouraged in Civ 7 rather than just sitting in your cities and your districts and letting your city walls and encampments, do all the heavy lifting of defending your territory.
That said, I feel like I think since Civ 3, there's been some benefit to scouting out enemy attacks before they happen, and that you could, since open borders were implemented, see the AI or other opponents building up units on the borders if you invested to scout that. What I think Civ 7 does nicely with it is it makes it more obvious that you should be doing that. Like there's nothing stopping you in Civ 6 from like putting some kind of scouting unit between you and other civs to keep an eye on how they're massing units.
But even then, like those scouts in the older games, only had the 2 visibility range, right? Like again, the big difference is
Yeah,
now
unless
you
you
have
got
that.
open borders,
Right.
and or trading, in which case you could see even them moving within their own territory. And
Yeah.
generally, if somebody is not hostile to you, they should have open borders for multiple reasons. So if they will not open borders with you, that was a tell on its own.
Right. Yeah, but now in Civ 7, there are more ways to see deeper into rival territory without needing open borders. So
Yeah, although you
reconnaissance
could always do
is
that with like
highly
spies
encouraged.
or diplomats or whatever, depending on the game.
Right. Yeah,
So,
but
like,
you would
got
have to
spies
wait
pretty early.
because those things usually wouldn't come online until, around halfway through the game, medieval era, Renaissance, somewhere in there. Now it's right from the start.
Yeah,
You do it with your scouts.
They were like late classical or early medieval. Generally, you'd have some means of scouting a hostile nation inside their borders to a degree.
Yeah, depending on the game.
We're generalizing across games here. It depends on the exact game, but you got spies very early in Civ 4, and even in Civ 6, you got your first one pretty early in the game.
Yeah, Civ 5, you had to wait a while. I think they were, for free when you entered the Renaissance or something like that?
I forget. There we go, when you got them in Civ 5. I think Civ 5 maybe had the least means of forced scouting into opposing territory.
Yeah, and in 6 with the spies, even if they don't even, you can send them to do something entirely different. Like you can have them stealing science or stealing gold, but they get this visibility around that district and stuff, and so you can see the AI units moving. And you go, I think that's a buildup.
Yeah. I mean, realistically, in 6, you would just use a scout on high ground, and that's generally good enough. It's like the AI does not do advanced tactics of like hiding its military as it's accruing it or something.
Yeah.
Nor is the AI that difficult to defend. Like, you only need a small
No.
percentage of their attacking force, so you would never like.
It's true. I have turned away very large AI invasions with just, even without an encampment, just the city with its walls and one decent ranged units inside the city.
Yeah. And again, like, you just get open borders in nearly every case, and like just park a unit somewhere in their territory, and you can see everything, and it's fine. And if they don't give you open borders, you kill them because they're hostile.
It's just nice. Yeah, it's just nice that you have that option when they're hostile to park a spy in there somewhere and then go, aha, I see what you're up to.
That's true.
Yep. And then we've got a bunch of gameplay updates, a bunch of updates to the AI, some pathing updates, some diplomacy updates. Let's see, what do we have here? Some
AI can receive peace deals and accept peace for the human team if they're on your team. What the heck?
Oh no. Oh dear.
It's pretty trolly. At least it can't offer peace, but being able to receive peace deals and accept them is dubious. Don't have AI teammates, I guess.
Oh, okay. I misread that. I wasn't quite understanding. Okay, I see what it is now. Yes, that is funny. Yeah, like playing team mode definitely complicates a lot of things for sure.
Yeah. That's why we need them to be our vassal, not our teammate.
Fishing boats on reefs or resource tiles will now properly receive the +1 happiness bonus for Hawaii. So if you were playing as Hawaii before and thought they kind of were weak, well, that's apparently been fixed. Wine apparently was never giving its happiness bonus to the capital, so that's been fixed. So we can all get our little Civ people drunk, and they'll actually be happy now.
What? Open borders are now lost after an alliance is accepted, rejected, or lost? That makes no sense. Why would that cancel open borders?
Maybe because alliance automatically gives you open borders.
But like, it's still a separately negotiated thing.
Well, maybe
it makes absolutely zero sense. Like, you could just keep it if you have the alliance, but I don't think you should lose it under any of the circumstances. That's just annoying.
I mean, like, I could maybe understand.
It's perfectly reasonable to want open borders, but not want an alliance for both the human and the AI players. Like, there's nothing wrong with saying I don't want an alliance, but I still want open borders. Like, that shouldn't be an auto thing.
Well, the game does actually count rejecting an alliance as like I don't want to say like a hostile act, but you do get a diplomatic penalty if you reject an alliance in Civ 7, which is something that I'm kind of like about, because
Yeah, I don't agree with that, but even with that implementation, it still makes no sense to auto cancel open borders. Now maybe the AI would cancel open borders as a consequence of being upset because you're not allying it. That's not great, but that's something. Like they're at least canceling the arrangement because they don't like you now, as opposed to just automatically canceling them on the spot. That makes no sense at all.
well, the one upside maybe is, and again, I'd have to like play more to see how this works, but maybe what that does is it gives you the opportunity to do the open borders agreement again, which maybe improves the relationship. So maybe it's a way, and I wish they had presented their logic for this one the way they did with all the Civ and leader changes, but maybe the idea is that this is a way of offsetting the relationship penalty from having rejected the alliance by then saying, okay, we don't want the alliance, but we do still want the open borders. Please be my friend.
I don't know. I feel like this is going to create more annoyance than it solves.
I
Although I do
mean,
think it's funny that they do put "or lost" at the end of the sentence. Yeah, open borders are now lost after they're lost. Yes, very helpful.
well, after the alliance is accepted, rejected, or lost.
That's true. Well, like, why would the alliance be lost? I mean, I guess if you break it.
Or, I don't know, do they expire, maybe, on their own?
Oh, that would be horrible. They better not be doing that. Yeah, I don't know. I I think this is a bad implementation. I don't think this is justifiable from either historical or gameplay terms. This is just rough. This particular one.
Fortified districts are now properly damaged or destroyed when the Open the Gates espionage action is completed during the Exploration Age. Okay, well, that's good. Your espionage actions to sabotage fortifications actually sabotage the fortifications now. Wonderful. So I guess previously that was just a waste of influence to do that. I remember I've done that a couple times, and I noticed that it didn't seem particularly effective, although in every case that I did it, like I did it in preparation of a war, but then the war started earlier than this completed, so it ended up being like moot because I already had my units there bombarding their defenses anyway. But apparently it just didn't work at all. Let's see, we got a bunch
That's
of...
always been an interesting thing to use. I think Civ 4 is the first to implement that, but you had to be really tight with the timing on it. And if your spy got caught and you were depending on that to take the city, well, now you can't take the city, which made it questionable to rely on it. Because if you used multiple spies, then it drastically raised the odds of them getting caught. So this has always been like, it's been around, but it's always been questionable to rely on it. I find that interesting.
Oh, I like this miscellaneous update. When spawning a migrant unit, there is now a tutorial and Civilopedia information. So, hooray, the game will actually tell you where the heck that thing came from. Because I remember playing, they would just spawn in my cities, and I'd be like, where the heck did this come from? I mean, this is a lot of stuff.
Yeah, it's a lot of small changes, but it's like things people had commented on and things. And oh, what was the one? The purchase menu will now display things that are unlocked but too expensive at the time. Yeah, because it's like even in Civ 6 right now, if I can't afford to purchase a thing, I can see how much it would cost.
I thought there was a
But then if you're-
checkbox to, like, show things that you... I thought there was a checkbox to toggle that on or off, but maybe not.
Either way, you should be able to see, and I guess now you can.
Yeah.
Plan ahead. I want to buy that thing. How much do I need? Instead of going, now do I have enough? Now do I have enough?
Right, yeah, there is for sure a checkbox for that for the build queue. Maybe there wasn't one for gold purchasing? Okay. But anyway, so yeah, there's a lot of little updates, some largely requested things from fans. There's also, unfortunately, a lot of things that this does not cover. And Phil, I don't know if you watched the developer update video, but they said UI is high on their priority, but they haven't gotten around to it yet. So,
all right.
Other things that they say they're working on are large and huge maps, Steam workshop support, new religious beliefs, new city-state bonuses, new town specializations, improvements to treasure fleets, and, of course, UI and quality of life improvements. So I'm sure when that patch comes out, Phil will have a lot of things to say about it.
Yeah, we'll see.
Will it be good things or bad things? Stay tuned.
Well, I mean, that it's become any priority is a positive sign, but whether it gets to a good state or not, it remains to be seen.
Oh, and apparently this update is on all platforms. It looks like there was a delay in the Switch version of the game, so it, I guess, never got the 1.2.0 update, but now the 1.2.1 update is on Switch, and it includes all of the changes from the 1.2.0 update. So if you were playing on Switch and felt like you were getting left out, you are no longer being left out.
For now.
Yeah, until the next big major patch.
Are you telling me that cross-platform multiplayer was not working perfectly?
No!
Man, that would be, I think, pretty miserable to play multiplayer on the Switch.
Apparently,
or any console, really. I don't think the Switch is special in that regard.
Apparently, it's better than VR. Based on what we read about in the last episode.
And I keep getting hit with ads for the VR version. I'm like, no, thank you.
Yeah, Reddit was spamming with you with those for a little while.
I was so curious until I read reviews, and then I was like, eh.
Yeah, apparently being better than the VR experience is not a high bar to clear.
Nope.
That makes sense. Given, like, what VR is trying to provide to you versus what kind of game this is.
Yeah, I mean, I like I said in the last episode, I totally understand, like, the thought process of, oh, Civ is a digital board game. If we make the VR game look like you're playing a board game on a table, that should work, right? That would be really cool. But, I mean, it's a little more complicated than that. But I don't want to rehash all that again.
It's time to make everything VR. Golf with your friends VR. Tabletop simulator VR.
So you could literally flip tables.
Yeah.
Hey,
yeah.
VR support for Tabletop Simulator would be awesome.
I mean, it'd probably be better than it is in Civ. Just because there's, like, less to go wrong. I mean, also it's not adding that much, really, but... I guess it'll let you use the thing. I don't know, I like the idea of VR, but, like, I don't think VR is offering enough yet to people to, like, make it usable in most games. It's not like you can, like, put the thing on and it's like in anime or something, or you get the full sensory experience across the board or something.
Yes, we're not quite to Star Trek holodecks yet.
Yeah, basically you can, like, feel the thing you're holding.
Yeah, I remember when I got the PSVR 2, one of the first games that I downloaded was a sword fighting game, and I thought, oh, this is going to be awesome. And then, like, I started playing it, and there's, like, no tactile feedback for when you, like, hit the other person's sword or their shield or their armor, and it just gets so... There's, like, there's no physical resistance, right? So you swing, but halfway through the swing, you hit something that stops you from continuing to swing in the game, but you keep swinging your hand because there's nothing physically stopping you from swinging. And so then the game also has to reconcile that, right? Like, So you do weird things in the game that look totally unnatural and unrealistic. And like I was constantly getting like my hand and my sword like tangled up in the other person's thing because of the fact that like I would physically go through them, but like the sword in the game wouldn't. And it was all kinds of messy. And I was like, oh yeah, I imagine.
Yeah, you'd think they'd at least like have on the gloves like something that gives you a sensation that they're like depressing your hands or something, like some kind of feedback.
I mean, there's vibration.
There's absolutely no way they could make it feel realistic to like an actual sword fight, but like give you something so that you can react when you get into a bind or when someone like grapples your arm or something. You get some kind of notification from the device that that represents that the game is acknowledged it's happened.
There's tactile feedback, there's vibration in the controllers, but it's not enough, right? Because in the heat of the moment, right, I'm not thinking
you need like something specific to each interaction, and like the more games you have, the harder that gets to do, right?
Yeah, I mean, supposedly the PS5 controllers and presumably the VR controllers are capable of doing that because they've got some super fancy haptic feedback motors in them, but it all depends on whether or not the game actually implements that stuff.
Yeah. And even then, like, it's still very limited compared to reality.
But then again, VR games where you're sitting in a car or a cockpit are awesome. That works exceptionally well.
Yeah.
Just not things like sword fighting and boxing and wrestling.
Yeah. Or like a football game would also be horrible, regardless of whether you mean like American football or soccer. It's they both be pretty rough.
Actually, there is a VR football game called Pro Era, and it is actually quite good. But the reason for that is because you basically just play as the quarterback. So the whole game is basically just you dropping back and throwing the ball.
Okay, there's no like you can't control anything else.
No, well you can. I mean, you can still run and scramble, and you can get sacked. Like you play. I was actually surprised. You play a whole football game. Right, like it's not just a bunch of like mini games or whatever. It's you play a whole football game, even to the point where when the defense is on the field, you can stand on the sideline and watch them, or you get like a little digital like tablet like they have on the real sidelines where you can scroll through the previous drive and look at like what play calls you called and what play calls the defense called and the results of each play. So it's pretty neat, but like you're not. Yeah, obviously, there's no way for the game to make it feel like you just got blindsided by Joey Bosa.
I don't think too much of the audience would want that experience.
No, probably not.
Like, even in high school, getting hit hurts a little bit. I can't imagine the difference. Having a professional drive me to the ground.
Yeah.
But I am certain it would be markedly worse. Assuming I'm still conscious to experience it.
But that game was surprisingly good. So I know I talk about football games a lot, so if there's anybody listening who also likes football games, I do recommend the NFL Pro Era VR game. It is...
There you go. It scans your body and puts in your real athletic stats.
It is surprisingly good and much more complete of a football game than I thought it would be.
I wonder if like the defensive roles and stuff are implemented properly. So like if you're working against coverages, they actually do what they're supposed to be doing.
It's very hit or miss. I only played the first game. There was a sequel as well that hopefully improved some of that stuff. But yeah, like the play calling logic and AI was like definitely not even up to par with like Madden. It was a lot more simplified. But like also playing the game from the perspective of the quarterback as opposed to the bird's eye view makes it a lot harder to read coverages to begin with. So I kind of feel like the fact that the coverages are very simplified is probably a blessing because I'm not a professional NFL quarterback. I cannot read defenses as well as a professional NFL quarterback. So, they're...
Well, nor does any game, to my knowledge, implement them like the NFL does.
Right.
So it's not like you would have to. You're probably, if they implemented coverage rules like that, it would be closer to a high school level than a professional level. Just because like the degree of complexity that NFL defenders have in the rules is so high that it would be hard to program game logic to like accurately.
Well, the biggest thing I think is that in real football, those rules are also custom tailored and modified based on your opponent. And that's something
week by week, and sometimes within the context of a game, if something's not working, they might trying to change it up to surprise them.
And that's something that a video game just like cannot do, at least not anywhere close to at the level that it's done in real life. But we're supposed to be talking about Civ, not football.
That's true.
Welcome to Football Podcast.
Crossover audience, probably not too strong with these two. That's fair.
Yeah, it's been a problem with me my whole life, is I have eclectic interest, and there's not a whole lot of people who share a large subset of that interest. So I have different little, cliques that I have of people who like one thing that I like, but not any of the other things.
Yeah, that's odd for me too. Like when I'm bouncing between like Battle Brothers, Dungeon Crawl, Stone Soup, and like Paradox games, and then the shooter or Ultimate Chicken Horse. Those are all very different game genres. So there aren't too many people who recognize me from one to the other. And every once in a while, someone will call me out and be like, "Oh wow, there's someone else who actually plays both of these games." It's not too common though. All right. Is there anything else we want to cover in the patch here?
No, I mean, we talked about a lot of the updates. We talked about football. I think we covered pretty much everything.
Yeah, our normal football segment during the patch updates. Yes. All right, then I guess moving on, we have a segment of 2 videos from Emotional Husky on YouTube. I'm not sure which one we should start with. Maybe the Rule of Thirds ones rather than the other one.
Well, I think he recommended the 6 things Firaxis got wrong as a prerequisite for the Rule of Thirds one, so we might want to just quickly go over the...
Okay, we'll go that route then.
Because I think he references those a lot in the second one.
Yeah, I guess. Okay, so we will start off with the 6 things developers got wrong about Civ 7. This is basically like a critique of Civ 7 to some degree. I mean, he clearly states in the video that he still likes the game, but these are things he...
And I do that a lot. Like, it is perfectly okay to like something and think it is good, but still be very critical of it. Like, I feel like I have to put that disclaimer in almost every YouTube video that I make, because so many of them are critiques of things that I like.
And basically nothing's perfect, so it's just a degree of like how tolerable or intolerable the imperfections are for each individual.
Yeah.
Okay, first mistake, and this one's not going to be very controversial to anybody because it's something we've been observing for many years in many games in many genres.
Not just Civ.
This is a complaint with the video game industry, not just with Civ.
Yeah, and I would agree that it's bad. Maybe from their perspective, it's not a mistake because they can get away with it apparently, but it's still bad, and that's intentionally leaving out parts of the game with the aim of adding them later. Yeah, I mean, I don't appreciate this.
Yeah, there's obvious hooks in there for later ages, but it's not in there. And I don't know if they got pushed by the publisher that you need to go now, and you don't have time to develop that extra bit. And they're not the only people that have ever had to suffer through that, dev team.
Now,
but it's still, it's
go
just
ahead.
one of those things that sets you off.
Yeah, I do always feel, though, that I have to play devil's advocate to a certain extent for this particular complaint, because I feel like a lot of people go overboard with this particular complaint because they expect everything that was in the previous game. Like, a lot of people act like they expect a sequel to be a patch or an expansion to the previous game, and it's like, no, like it's a completely different game, often built on a new engine with like completely different rules. Like, just porting over stuff from the previous game doesn't necessarily just work. And in a lot of cases, you do have to cut things because you're putting in new concepts and new ideas that maybe replace or overrule those things. Now, we can debate until we're blue in the face whether the new things are better than the old things, but a lot of times they're maybe not completely mutually exclusive, but they don't go together maybe in the way that people think they should.
Yeah, I've seen that with a different game here that I've been watching people stream, called Roadcraft, but it's made by the same people that made this other game called SnowRunner. And a lot of people's comment, there's a big part of the community is just like, well, why is this not everything that was in the previous game, in the SnowRunner game? Why didn't you just make SnowRunner 2 and not this thing? Because the devs wanted to do something different.
Right.
It's frustrating for me to see that. It's like, I like both the games, but I see where the devs were going here, but there's so much the player base is going, just make game number 2 instead of doing your new thing. Just make
Right.
more of the same. Yeah.
And in the case of Civ 6 to Civ 7, a really good example is the eras versus the ages, right? You might have someone who really liked the Golden Ages and Dark Ages and era points, era score mechanic from Civ 6, and then it's like, oh, why isn't that in Civ 7? Well, because ages work completely differently, right? Like that feature doesn't translate like readily to the new game. Now, maybe eventually down the road, in a few years with one or two expansions, they find a way to add something like that back. But like, it's not something that you should necessarily expect to be in the new game because it works completely differently.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
even those
as usual, there's nuance with this stuff.
yeah.
Although I think the broad criticism of Civ games each release is that things probably should have been in a better state at release.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you have really egregious examples, like, for example, I think one of the most egregious examples in Civ that I can think of was Civ 5 launching without any kind of spying or espionage, like, at all. Like, not even at a really abstract level. Like, just nothing.
Well, we've had spy units since, like, what, at least Civ 2, so what, guys?
Yeah.
What?
Right. Now, you could look at Civ 7 and say, oh, well, Civ 7 doesn't have spies either, but that's because espionage has been moved to being a diplomatic action that you do with influence rather than with, a separate, espionage currency or a dedicated spy unit. So there is still an espionage system in the game, but it works completely differently. So if you're saying, oh, why aren't there spy units? Well, it's because, your spy units are basically diplomats that cost influence to use instead of being units on the board.
Yeah, I think you'll always have people making this complaint, and it just depends on the game how legitimate it is. Because we are observing in many cases that games are basically being sold as finished products when they're really in what used to be a beta state.
Or early
and
access.
At that point, the criticism, yeah, I mean, either or.
Yeah.
But I mean, I think beta is very often a more valid comparison point because there's just so many bugs, so many features that aren't in the game that are intended to be added by the developers, but they're still selling the game as a 1.0 release without those in there.
Yeah, I pay what, like $30 or $40, right, to buy Manor Lords in early access. So when I boot up Manor Lords and it doesn't have, a lot of policies to select or any diplomatic options that actually work with the AI players, I'm a lot more tolerant of it because I bought a game that says early access, right? I didn't buy a game that was a 1.0 game, right? That cost $70 or potentially in the future $80 to $100.
And that's fair. And depending on the kind of game it is and what you want from it, that it may already be in a state that you're happy with. That's certainly the case for me with Star Sector. But I think it's very important to advertise it like that if it's in that state. And when it isn't, then this is a very valid criticism that it's basically being sold as a finished product when it isn't.
Yeah, I basically go into pretty much every AAA game purchase, like as if it were an early access game. I try to have that mindset. Although, I still recognize that I'm paying $70 or $80 or $100 potentially in the future to play it, which means I'm not going to be as tolerant of problems as I would be with something like, Manor Lords. But it's a problem with the industry that is just the assumption that people have, that you're going to be paying full price for a 1.0 release game from a AAA publisher that feels like it is still in beta or early access.
Okay, back to Civ 7 here. And the second mistake was underworked. I mean, it's really an extension of the first mistake. Underworked the potential for crises and age changes. I mean, really, this is an example of number one, basically. Because I don't think they're going to leave this static, and considering that we've already seen tweaks to crises and age changes in patches. And we'll probably see more.
Yeah, well, and just, the abruptness with which these age transitions happen really does add to the feeling of the game being undercooked. Like, I one of the things that I've suggested, I think I wrote about this on my blog at one point, is that I really feel like the crises should have taken place during those transitional periods between the ages, right? Like after the age ends, then should be the crisis. And so you would play more of that, that those hundreds or in some cases 1,000 years in between the end of antiquity and the start of exploration, for example, right? To kind of fill in that gap a little bit more.
Yeah,
Maybe.
it does
I
feel
think
like
it
you
depends on the
should
crisis.
that you should have some sort of a period of maybe it's 20 or 30 turns where you're playing through the crisis to transition, that's the actual transition instead of just, okay, we're done, next stage. It feels a
Right.
little bit abrupt,
Yeah,
even when I'm
like
watching. Yeah.
and one of the problems with the crises in the current implementation of the game is that a lot of them feel kind of toothless, right? Because if you can just power through to the end of the age, then the crisis also just ends without you having to have done anything assertive to stop it. So it's not even like the crisis is like a final boss or like a skill check of any kind to like test whether you built a robust enough empire. Like it's not a pass or fail thing where you have to succeed at completing the crisis in order to get to the next age. It's just something that happens. And maybe it's inconvenient enough that you have to take affirmative steps to mitigate it, but in a lot of cases it just isn't, and you just keep hitting end turn until you get the last couple codices that you need or whatever to end the age, or hoping that an AI player fills a couple of legacy goals to end the age, right? You're just sitting there at 98%, just hitting end turn, not even worrying about dealing with the crisis, because you know that literally anytime you hit end turn, it might just end.
It could end. Yeah, you should be having to sit there and deal with an uprising properly, not just spam in turn until you with AI hits the right conditions.
I think this will be difficult to get perfectly right.
Oh, for sure.
I don't want to see it where you only get crises as an age ends. That'd be kind of static and more predictable than I think the crises are supposed to be. So I think you should have like some that do fit that time frame, but also ones that don't, and they just adjust
So you're
how difficult
suggesting
they are to handle.
you're suggesting maybe having like mini crises like during the age.
Or
Yeah.
maybe many, maybe not, and maybe you get them and maybe not. Like you have to be prepared for them, but you don't know which one or if it's even going to happen. And then there's some that can only happen during transitions that you have to deal with one way or another as well.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the way that the crises currently work, I honestly don't see any reason why the crisis couldn't happen at any point during the age. Because, like I said, it's not a pass or fail check as a requirement to go on to the next age. It's just something that happens. So if it happened in the middle of the age, so long as it's at a point in the game where you're capable of dealing with it, like I don't see that would change the flow of the game all that much, other than making it more important for you to actually do something about the age, because the effects of do something about the crisis, because then the effect of the crisis would actually have long-term consequences, because you would have to play through the rest of the age with whatever the crisis did to you. So if you get a plague that kills a bunch of your population, like that's going to nerf you through the rest of the age. I don't know how that would work in Civ 7, because like population doesn't work the way that it worked in previous games. It's basically just the number of districts you have is your city's population. But like you get the idea.
Yeah, for people who want the realism argument, in real history, empires had to survive crises. So there you go.
But I get the impression that this is very much an extension of the first mistake, and that they will keep changing this. Since we've already seen them tweak it somewhat. So we're probably due for more changes on those. Okay, third, streamlined the victory conditions. Man, this depends what you mean.
Yeah, because in some cases, like in Civ 6, we always had difficulty with cultural aid. How to do a cultural victory wasn't really ever. I don't think we really quite had a handle on that. Some players did, but this way we have that screen and we can see what we're supposed to do. That's not necessarily a bad thing.
Now, Emotional Husky actually preferred, based on these videos, the time when it was just conquest or space, or I guess score, if nobody won either of those two in time.
I think basically the argument that he's making is that having all of these very discrete victory conditions means that there's a very specific checklist of things that you have to do to obtain a victory that actually ironically makes the game feel more linear than in previous games where there were fewer but more broad victory conditions that you could approach in multiple different ways.
I think that's true due to the way they implemented it. Because it used to be the case where if you were strong in science, you would unlock things that would give you the ability to pivot into culture elite. Whereas like in newer implementations of Civ, that effect is decreased. Like you have the two tech trees basically, and pushing culture, like you didn't unlock as much through science that would catch you up in that way. Nor was espionage an option to catch you back up, etc. For like culturally. So like the way these interact with each other isn't as strong as it used to be. With the exception of conquest, you can still interrupt victory conditions by killing the other civ before, or severely damaging them before they get near their victory condition.
Mm-hmm.
So that's like one through line that still exists, but for the most part, the degree to which they interact between each other is less.
And this is a criticism that I do, agree with to most extent, and it's something that I've actually complained about before as well, which is, one of my favorite things in Civ 4. I forget what the name of the victory was, but there was domination and then there was conquest, and there were two different things, and one was killing all the other players, but the other one was like just controlling a majority of the world's population and land area. And that was something that there were so many different ways to go about that, right? You could go about that through conquest. You could go about that through, creating permanent alliances. You could go about that through vassalizing other empires. You could just be really, really, really fast at getting settlers out and just colonizing the map faster than everyone else. Like you could get there by just being really tall in all of your cities. Like it wasn't just, oh, you have to go capture all of the other players' capitals. And that was something that I had liked a lot.
Mistook their ideal avatar. This one I just disagree with. I think this is framed incorrectly, straight up incorrectly.
This was the one about.
Is like he goes into like the different demographics who play the game and sometimes the politics of it, and I just don't think that's the correct way to look at what's happened. Like you do need to bring in new people, but I think what the better criticism here for later Civ games isn't that they're like trying to appeal to more people. It's that they are getting away from what makes Civilization distinct from other games in trying to transfer it into a mobile game with mobile game UI and like weaker mechanics. It's not like people in the 15 to 25 range as of the time of this recording are universally against deep strategy or very complex games or whatever. Like there are still people like less than half my age who enjoy playing Dominion 6. Like, come on.
In fact, you could argue the opposite. Like you can look at, there are, it actually kind of looks like, strategy games and simulation games are starting to have a little bit of a renaissance. Like we have more turn-based strategy games now than we had 10 years ago or 20 years ago.
Yeah. And it's hard to make conclusions from that. But my point is, regardless of somebody's age or politics or whatever they're into, there will be a subset of that population who wants a deep strategy game and a subset that does not. And that's true for every age range and demographic. Yeah. And I think what Civ's mistake is in this context is that Civ is getting away from what makes it Civ. And I think that is a legitimate criticism.
Trying to cast a net to too wide of a base of players. Whereas the whole thing that Civ has always been is it's been a little bit niche if you like strategy things. And that's there you have a whole generation and a couple of generations that grew up with simpler games on mobile, and now they've gotten to that age, whatever age they are, they want a challenge. And that's what Civ was in the range of. They wanted it was in a tier where it was a challenge and not trying to be easy for everybody to pick up.
It's not like you have to fully compromise that to be successful. Like an excellent example of this is how Dark Souls 1 started and how we wound up with Elden Ring. Like Elden Ring still has plenty of challenge in it, and man, that game sold extremely well considering the niche. So it's not like
Yeah,
you have to make yourself like every other turn-based strategy
No.
or make yourself like a mobile phone game in order to get an audience. That's clearly not true. Hearts of Iron is also still extremely popular despite so many things wrong with it, and it being an old game now, around 9 years soon. Like, and it's still in top 100 Steam, I think. So yeah, like if you do your niche well, you can attract a pretty large fan base.
And I also do want to point out that Civ 7 is entering a more competitive marketplace, right? There are other historic 4X strategy games for people to play now, and that's for pretty much the first time in Civilization's history as a series. There are other 4X historic strategy games to play. You know, we've got Millennia, we've got Humankind, we've got Ara History Untold. You know, we've got former Civilization developers making their own games. You know, John Schaefer making At the Gates. There's options now. So if there's something about Civ 7 that you don't like, then there are other places that you can go to potentially find what you do like. And then on top of that, there's 6 other Civilization games now that you can go back and play.
1990s turn-based strategy slander. What the heck?
Yeah. But I mean, for at least
no Master of Orion, no Heroes of Might and Magic, no Warlords 2 or 3. What?
Well, but
what is this?
I'm talking specifically about the historic themed ones.
Well, you said okay, sure.
Yeah. But yeah.
Yes, there's always been
strong turn-based competition.
There's always been plenty of space 4Xs on Steam, like Galactic Civs, Master of Orion, all those sorts of things. They've been around.
But not so much historical ones, and trying to do something like EU4 and stuff is a lot. Well, historical is a lot different.
Right, but like Total War and Europa Universalis and Crusader Kings, those are a totally different type of game than Civilization was, because they're real time, they're more simulation oriented. Like, they don't fill quite the same niche. If you wanted Civilization for at least the past 20 years, you had to play Civilization. But now, there's 5 other games, or more, that you can potentially play.
True.
And
the straight up historical turn-based is
and
more
there's now the
competitive.
backlog of 6, other Civilization games, plus, like, Civilization Revolution and stuff like that. Many of which still hold up well. Like, people are still playing Civ 4, they're still playing Civ 5, they're still playing Civ 6.
In fact, there are more current active Civ 5 and 6 players than there are 7 players.
Correct.
Which probably suggests that something went awry with Civ 7, because even though, like, we expect some teething issues when a game releases, that a game 2 iterations ago is still performing better, this early in the new game's life cycle is a pretty big warning sign.
I wonder if I wonder what the numbers were between Civ 6 and Civ 4 player counts when Civ 6 came out. But it's not a direct.
I don't think 4 was ahead of 6.
But it's also not a direct comparison because Civ 4 released at a time when games still came on like CDs and it wasn't on Steam initially. So there were a lot of people who played the disc version of Civ 4 and never had it or played it on Steam. So the player counts on Steam are not going to cover anybody who might still be playing Civ 4 on their, old CD-ROM.
Yeah, that's true.
I have no idea how many people that might be.
But I don't think Civ 6 stayed behind Civ 5 for a long time either.
No,
maybe like initially, there was still the things that were being worked out and multiplayer being worked out, but then later on, Civ 6 overtook it easily.
Yeah.
I guess that's what we're going to have to see over the next, year or so as we get past this initial phase. Is Civ 7 going to come back up above 6 or not?
And again, it's only been 4 months.
Yeah, exactly.
These next 2 are more subjective. Leaned into leaders and away from civilizations. I mean, it did that. Is that an objective mistake?
I mean, I don't know. Is he advertising it as an objective mistake or just something that he doesn't like?
He says it's something they got wrong about Civ 7.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, all of this is an opinion, to be fair. However, I do think that things like the first criticism are much closer to objective in Civ 7's case than this is.
I will say that I was surprised that Civ 7 went the direction of changing civs over the course of the game, because I would have thought that the way they would have gone about it would be you pick a civilization and then change leaders over the course of the game, to reflect more realistic changes in regime and dynasty changes and government changes that happen over the course of time.
I agree. That would have made more sense, both especially from a historical perspective, because like a lot of cultures in the world, even if the country borders don't look anything like what they would have historically, like the people have broadly lived in that area contiguously for centuries longer than there's been any particular nation there. I mean, there's some exceptions to that, but in many parts of the world, like you have some kind of continuous series from like the early medieval period until now. And now those cultures themselves have adapted over time, but like it's still like a contiguous thing. Whereas there's just no such thing as like someone in Europe becoming Maya or vice versa without like being straight up conquered.
Yeah, now I will say that I definitely see his point about how he says that one of the appeals of civilization, at least for him, was the idea of taking like the Aztecs or the Maya into the space age. Right, yeah. Which is and something that
making a civ that stands the test of time does imply that your civ is there the entire time. Yeah, so it is a deviation in that regard.
Staying as the same civ and pulling them all the way from the basic antiquity up into the space age has been like a core civ thing. While I see that the devs wanted to try new things at the same time, which is interesting to change civs, because even our modern civilizations started from somewhere else and have adapted.
Yeah, but also Civ 7 also changed its motto, right? Like the motto for Civ 7 is not build civilization to stand the test of time anymore. It was something like build something you believe in or something like that.
Yeah.
So like
that goes to point 6. Prioritize innovation over tradition. Not tradition. He wrote tradition.
Oops, whoops.
Dan's not here, so I will take over Dan's role for a moment and point out the spelling.
Oh, are you gonna make a spreadsheet too?
We'll do spreadsheets later. I'm pretty good with Excel actually, but in this case, I'm just calling out a spelling error.
Yeah.
But yeah, there too, like that's gonna come down to preference to a degree. Now you maybe. Again, we're getting a little too far away from what made Civ to its audience, both old and new. And it remains to be seen if that holds up over time.
Well, I think with everything else that has come out on the market that's in that historical 4X type space, they felt pressure to innovate as well.
Yeah.
We need to change. We need to not be exactly like them, but add some of those similar concepts and to stay going.
And on top of that, like if you remember, Civ 6 got a lot of flack when it came out for being Civ like 5.2, right? Like people criticize Civ 6 for just feeling like a Civ 5 do-over. When
that happened, but I don't think it's legit.
Like
yes,
I
didn't think it was legit at the time,
right? Like,
and I had my criticisms of Civ 6, but I just don't think that was true.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think that the games felt very similar to play. Like, yes, Civ 6 carried over a lot of mechanics from Civ 5, but, a lot of them were changed, and a lot of them, like, a lot of just the way that the game played felt different, right? Like, it was a lot more of a building game and a lot less
objectively different.
Yeah.
And very strongly so. If you want to play Civ 6 at a decent level, it cannot look anything like 5.
Right,
but that was true on release.
But if you just looked at the feature set for Civ 6, like, yes, that list looked very much like the feature list for Civ 5 Brave New World. Even though everything worked differently.
I guess. But, like, I just don't think that was legit criticism.
I agree. I think there were a lot of criticisms of Civ 6 that were not legit. Like, there was also the fiasco about the graphics being too cartoony, which I think was also overplayed.
Oh yeah, that's true.
Oh,
Now that
yeah.
you're bringing that up, I recall it. Yes.
And
So
and
okay,
in
I
fact,
guess.
Civ 7 actually, has the more realistic graphics that people were asking for Civ 6, but that has now come at the cost of the game map being less readable at sight. Like, all the buildings look very similar. They don't have the bright color coding like they did in Civ 6, so it's hard to tell, a science building or a science district from a culture building or a culture district, and so forth. Now, is that important to everybody? Maybe, maybe not. But, there was definitely a good reason for why Civ 6 looked the way that it looked.
It's interesting that Emotional Husky recommended this video over his next one at first. Because, like, a lot of what he's talking about in our next video, which is did Firaxis developers break Sid Meier's rule of thirds, is an extension of points 5 and 6, in my mind.
Yeah.
Because he spends a big part of this video on what should be considered core elements of Civ that remain in the 1/3 that doesn't change no matter what. And Emotional Husky is of the opinion that Civ 7 did change a number of things which should have been in the do not change 1/3. And that's part of its issues. And I think to maybe some extent, I agree with that.
Well, it's also a lot of things
So
that have
honestly,
just changed gradually over time, right? It's almost like a Ship of Theseus kind of problem. Like, at what point did it really stop being the way it was in Civ 1 and, became something completely new, right? When it
Yeah, that's true too.
It changes a little bit with each new release until, yes, eventually when you get 7 iterations later, it looks like a completely different thing.
I mean, it looks pretty different even at 6 iterations later. But yeah, maybe it's just that maybe there just isn't 33% that remained unchanged. Maybe, yeah.
Well,
maybe that's the criticism here.
Definitely not from the first game. Like, if he thinks it should be 33% the same from Civ 1, then I think that's a misunderstanding I think
maybe
that's,
even from Civ 6 is
right. I think Sid Meier was saying that it's from
debate.
game to game, not from the original game. It's 30,
obviously. I think
from 6 to 7, it's 33% changed, 33% new, 33% old. Not from Civ 1.
And I think there might be a fair case that it has not adhered even to that.
Yes, and that's what we're here to discuss.
Yeah, but I don't. Yeah,
it might be 25% unchanged or something, but it doesn't have to be strictly thirds.
Maybe not, but it's clear that Civ 7 is not what a lot of players expected it to be too.
Civ 7 is definitely.
I think there's some basis.
Yeah, Civ 7 is definitely not a Civ 6 do-over. For all the people who criticize Civ 6 for being a Civ 5 do-over, you can't pull that card for Civ 7 for sure.
Yeah, I wonder to what extent this is a product of Civ 7's release being shoddy versus just not preferring the new gameplay. Because those things do build on each other. Like, there's a halo effect. If things are visually bad, if the game is a pain to learn because the information on it is poorly presented, if it's like a slog to play through it, if there's bugs or things aren't working properly, all of that is going to color players' perceptions of the actual new mechanics because they're not having a good experience. So I don't know. This is a pretty significant departure from the previous game, probably more so than 5 to 6 was, even though 6 was a huge change over 5.
Well, and 5
felt
like a huge change over 4 with the completely new way that
basically 1 unit per tile.
Basically, it becoming a war game, right, as opposed to an empire building game. Right.
We can debate on that again. But.
Well, and especially
yes,
vanilla
they were
Civ
all
5.
Clearly different from their predecessors. I think starting with 3, each game really accelerated the difference compared to the previous. That being said, Civ 7 does seem like it's changed more, question mark. I just don't know how much of that is the real issue versus how it was implemented in the state it was in at release.
Well, and
like we were talking about before, we got a beta, not the full release, and it's like we're going to get what they probably really envisioned sometime late this year, early next year, when they've had more time to work on the things they didn't get to finish.
Now, this was true in Civ 5 too. Civ 5's release was pathetic.
God.
And I would like to say that Civ 7's release also feels like a more complete product than Civ 5's release was. Even if it's not as good, I feel like it's more feature complete, because Civ 5 shipped missing a lot of features.
I don't know. I think it's pretty apt to compare the two. I maybe one is slightly better or worse than the other. I don't know. They're both pretty bad.
Or at least I feel like there's a much clearer vision for Civ 7 of what the game is supposed to be compared to what Civ 5 was at launch.
We'll see.
In any case, I think, if you're comparing to Civ 6, like Civ 6 did feel like a very feature-complete and robust game when it came out. Like, yes, it had AI problems and balance problems and stuff like that, but in terms of, it felt very feature-complete, right? It had a lot of polish, it had a lot of production quality when it first released. And so I think looking at Civ 7 in comparison to that, it definitely looks like it's gone backwards quite a bit.
Its release is way worse than 6. I think you're using the benefit of hindsight to a huge degree with Civ 5. Like, the lead developer changed. So yeah, Civ 5 also changed, but I don't think what it changed into was the original vision. I don't think it could have been, because like so many adjustments were made. And we may yet see that with Civ 7 in some capacity. And I don't think we'll flip lead developers or anything, but it might evolve as a response to the community reaction to it into something different than they pictured originally. Or it could just be that they find that now that more people are playing it, things work, some things don't, and they evolve the game that way. But I have a feeling that like Civ 7 5 years from now is going to look pretty different. Just how is not clear to me.
Right. But anyway, what are the fundamental elements that Emotional Husky thinks should be in every Civ game? Let's look at those, I guess. I remember there were at least two.
I forget already.
One was the victory types, which we kind of already touched on.
Yes. Yet another reason I felt like this video should have maybe been second. Or been, yeah. Other way around. Whatever.
Yes, which is that he seems to prefer like Civ 1 and Civ 2 only having like two victory types, right? It was either military victory or science victory.
Yeah. I don't know. I do think that the game has gotten away from integrating what makes a strong Civ across victory conditions, which it used to do better.
Yeah, I've kind of advocated in the past that I almost feel like I would prefer more of like a victory point system where like completing the things that used to be the discrete different victories or completing the milestones in them would give you points towards a victory condition so that you could go in kind of multiple directions and still win. And that's kind of more the way that some of the other, that's kind of more how Humankind works. That's more how Aura History Untold works. Those games don't have those very rigid, well-defined, specific victory conditions. They have more ambiguous, points that you earn by completing various milestones. And
it's just hard to get away from the general progression of a strong civilization is better at doing stuff than a weaker one. And so, like, no matter what your metrics are, if you're generally more capable as a Civ, you're going to be generally more capable of reaching those milestones or victory conditions or point elements or whatever. Like, you get convergent instrumental goals, I guess.
Yeah, but one of the problems that you do get with Civ's design is that you make early decisions that can sometimes funnel you down a particular path, and it becomes increasingly difficult to veer off of that path if game circumstances change. Right now, and one of the strengths of Civ 7 is that Civ 7 does address that by dividing the game basically up into 3 sub-games. Right, where you can follow one particular victory path for the Antiquity Age and then do a different victory path for the Exploration Age. Now, you'll probably have bonuses, and your infrastructure will be set up from Antiquity that you'll probably favor following the same or similar, legacy path, but you don't have to. And it's a lot... Go ahead.
Well, you could, yeah, because you can start out as something that's more economic based, and that turns into you either having a strong military in a later age or a strong science game in the later age. So you can, in a sense, pivot from what you started from. If you look at the rest of the map and go, oh, hey, maybe this is better for a conquest type of a thing, or
That's
I could
always
go to
been true,
space.
though.
Yeah,
Like, you
but
could
it,
start
it feels
off.
like, oh, sure, but it feels like it's maybe a little like you don't have to think so hard at the beginning of, oh no, I have to do this exactly right, or I'm not going to be able to do something like I've brought up cultural victory before. You have to almost have to start thinking you want to do culture from the beginning.
Yeah,
But in this case,
in Civ 7, the decisions that you make in 4000 BC do not like force you down a particular path in,
yes,
2050 AD. Well, you're not in 2050 AD in Civ 7 anyway, because the game ends, with the development of the atomic
yeah.
bomb at
But
the end of the Second World War. But
if we get the atomic age and get a later age, we'll have that thing, but we won't be locked in. Like you're not going to, if you start culture, you're not locked into culture. You can go over into the others. It seems like with a little more ease with Civ 7 than you could in previous.
yeah, and Civ 7 encourages that more by explicitly breaking the game up into multiple stages and having different, quote, victory conditions for each of those stages.
And this is where the switching the civs comes in as well.
Right. So you have a lot more opportunity to do that. I'm not saying it wasn't possible in older games.
No,
it absolutely was.
Yeah.
But Civ 7 encourages it a lot more.
I wonder to what extent that's true. I feel like once play is optimized, you're still going to be building advantages from one age to the next in such a way that you're probably not going to deviate that frequently. But I guess we'll see.
And that
maybe they'll change the game enough where that's not true.
Right, and that may very well be true in practice. But then the question is, well, is that what their original vision was, or was the vision to be like, no, you can, when you get to a new age, you can completely pivot? Or was it?
Like,
oh no,
true
you have
in
to.
Practice is what matters, though.
Well,
like,
right.
You
yes.
could in Civ 4 conquer most of the world and be like, you know what? I want to win culture, and there was nobody who could stop you if you did that.
Yeah. So the question is going to be: Are they going to make it? Over time, are they going to lean more into like changing your approach to the game in each age, or are they going to lean more into forcing the players to double down on what they had done in previous ages in order to maximize their bonuses in the subsequent ages? And we're not going to know what direction that's going to go until it happens and they start releasing DLC and expansion packs that do that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
And then
multiplayer problem.
And then I think the other big complaint again was just talking more about them leaning too much into leaders and not into civilizations.
Yeah. I forget what he said on this multiplayer problem part of the video.
I think it was just about balance, because every different civ and leader has completely different abilities, that it's a lot harder to balance that for multiplayer than it was, like, say, in Civ 4, where every civ just had one or two of a set of, like, what was it, 5 or 6 or 7 or whatever different, generic abilities.
Yeah. I think the developers just have to not worry about multiplayer balance, because even in Civ 3 and 4, the disparity between civs was large enough that at equal skill, some civs would just win consistently.
Right. What was the
games.
What was the old multiplayer joke for Civ 4? What color of Inca are you?
Yes.
Yeah. And even if that wasn't true, there's just some civs and leader combinations that were clearly far superior to alternatives. And that's been the case, I think, since Civ 3, and has not stopped being true from Civ 3 until now. And so, like, multiplayer has to, and it's not just the civs, it's the starting positions, the maps, the way the maps generate can drastically alter people's starting position strength and how they ultimately play out. There's so many factors that if you want a multiplayer experience that causes the person who plays the best to win most of the time, you have to mod it.
But is that going to be
rules or?
But is that going to be the person who's like playing the best, like in general, or is it the person who best leverages their particular civilization and leader's abilities?
I think that's a distinction without a difference, ultimately. Like your specific civ and leader abilities are part of your general approach to the game if you're playing at a high level, in my opinion. Like they are factors in your decision making, but do not solely inform it. Those things have to interact if you want to be good.
Yeah, but also like again, like in Civ 7's defense, the fact that you can change civilizations over the course of the game does mean that a lot of those problems with older games, with Civ 5 and Civ 6 in particular, where some civs were very closely tied to map conditions, means that even if you start the game with a civ that doesn't work great on the map you've been given, you will have an opportunity to change. So that's not going to hamstring you for the entire game. It's only going to, potentially hamstring you for one era. It's actually one of the things that I do like about Humankind is that you have that prehistoric era at the beginning of the game where you get to explore the map a little bit before you even choose what your first culture is going to be. And I kind of wish Civ 7 had done something similar where you could at least get to see what the map looks like before you have to commit to your antiquity civ.
Yeah,
Correct me if I'm wrong, but you cannot all pick the same thing, right? Between ages?
I think there might be an option to allow that or disallow that. And I think it defaults to no, every player has to pick a unique or distinct civilization leader.
Because, like, I think it's not really correcting it. It's just the same issue. Like, which color Rinka are you again when it comes to MP? If you allow for that. But if you don't, then you have a race to stay viable, basically.
Yeah, and even now, I would like that ability to look around the map first and see, because there's so much that depends on you. Absolutely have to settle turn one, and I wish you had a little more time to look and see if could I move a couple of tiles. Is there a big place right next door? I know the map scripting is meant to make your capital area as nice as possible if you stay in place, but sometimes what you want to do, you might want to be a little bit different area, or there might have been a natural wonder just adjacent that really would have uh superpowered you for the first stage if you could only have seen that was right over there.
And my experience with the game so far has been that the starting biases seem to work a lot better than they did in previous games. Because I think not only do the start biases say like what kind of terrain you start on and whether you start on the coast or on a river, but they also have things like what resources you can potentially start next to, and things like that as well. And in my experience so far is that whenever I've had a civ that has or a leader that has an ability that plays off of the terrain, I almost always start in a terrain that does let me use that ability. Like, I mean, it's going to vary on how well I can use that ability, but I'm never getting those situations where, I pick the Vikings and I start in the middle of inland Pangaea. Like, I haven't seen that sort of thing happen at all in Civ 7.
I do think it's an interesting idea, though, to like first show you your start location and then you pick your civ. That is,
Yeah.
that would be one of those departures that would build on previous games pretty well.
Yeah, and again, that's what Humankind does. Like at the beginning of the game, you basically have one like settler unit, and what you do is you explore around the map and you collect like food and you can fight wild animals and stuff like that. And when you get enough food, that's one like I think it's called a tribesman or something like that is the name of the unit. It splits into a second unit, and now you have two units exploring around. And at any time, one of those units can found your first city. And then when you do that, you get to choose what your ancient era civilization is going to be. And so part of it is it's a balancing act between how much do I want to explore and pick an optimal start location versus how long do I want to wait before picking my first civilization, because it's a first come first serve thing, right? If you settle your city before everyone else, you get the first pick of the civilizations. And if you settle later, then you have to pick what's left over. And that might be suboptimal. Like you might have specifically looked for a place that is best for a particular civilization, but if you took too long to settle, someone else may have picked that civilization already.
Yeah, there's that and the usual factors of snowballing. Like at some point, an average starting location that with a couple turns head start can just be objectively better.
And I think Humankind handles that pretty well, because like in addition to collecting food, you can also collect, like they have like, you know, goodie huts as well, and you can collect, you know, yields and stuff like that that then carry over into when you do settle your first city. So you'll have some science. Yeah, you'll have some science and some culture generation happening based on how many resources you found during that period of exploration. You know, kind of like how the, you know, for Civ players, if you remember how the Maori worked in Civ 6, right? Like you start the game,
Yeah.
you know, on the seas, and you generated like passive culture and science until you founded your first city. So it's kind of like that, except in Humankind, you have to collect that stuff from the map. It's not just passively generated automatically.
Yeah, I know there's sometimes when we start up in a game of Civ, we have a specific plan of who we want to play and what we want to try. But when you're later on, or you're just trying out newer things, sometimes it's nice to have that mix up of would be nice to have the mix up of let me see the map first, and then I'll decide what Civ I'd like to.
Yeah, and it's really surprising to me that given the way that the rest of the ages work, that wasn't in Civ 7. And I think I've even read places where like the developers have been specifically asked about that, and they said, no, we absolutely don't want to add a prehistoric like age. Like they're not adding ages earlier than antiquity. They're only going to add ages after, you know, the modern.
It doesn't have to be a full-on age. It could just be an interlude at the beginning of antiquity.
Yeah. I've seen devs say they wouldn't do things before and then do them anyway.
That's true. Yeah, if there's enough pressure from the player base, then yeah, they can do anything.
Well, if it's just obvious that the community wants it enough.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's by far one of my favorite features of Humankind is that early, I think it's Neolithic is what they call it, something like that, Neolithic age, where you're, you know, basically cave people coming out of your caves and finding a place to settle your first city.
I haven't played Humankind.
And what's crazy about that too is you can actually meet the other civilizations at that point in the game and like actually have diplomatic relations and even go to war with the other civilizations before either of you has settled a city. And you can get eliminated from the game before you've settled your first city. Like you can either if your settler units are killed by wildlife, or you know you do wander into the sphere of influence of another civilization, whether they've founded cities or not. Like you can go to war with them, and they might kill your starting settler units, and you lose the game.
Oh man, turn 1 cheese and Civ 4 Earth Stars.
Well, that's one of the things I think you'd have to turn off for multiplayer, because too many people would try to find you and hunt you down.
Well, you're using up time to move, so you'd be at a fundamental disadvantage doing that. Unless you're like spawning too close. Okay, I guess we are coming up on time here. So this has been episode 446. Thank you all for joining us. I'm the main team, and with us today we're Makalua.
Yeah, my caffeine comes with protein as well. Ooh.
And Mega Bears fan.
I also would prefer that the Bermuda Triangle not be a natural wonder. I agree with you on that one, Emotional Husky. 100%. I would rather see other real natural wonders.
The Great Barrier Reef, which you cannot work, makes a return.